It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 656 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. I have two great conversations lined up for you today. First up will be Pat Lynch. Many of you know Pat from his years of work as one of the principals at CSO Insights, the B2B sales research firm. And Pat's now the Vice President of Sales Enablement Excellence and Innovation at MindTickle. And following Pat, I have another fun talk with my fellow co-conspirator, Bridget Gleason. Today's show is brought to you in part by our friends at Discover.org. The Discover.org platform is a game changer for sales and marketing professionals. The feature-rich sales intelligence platform is supported by over 250 researchers who are continually updating contact data and providing account-specific insight to help sales and marketing teams break ahead of the pack. So see the product live at discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. That's discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. Okay, first up on Accelerate this week is Pat Lynch. And today we're talking about sales enablement. Actually, this is the first of two conversations I'm having with Pat on this topic of sales readiness and sales enablement. The next one you'll see coming up in a few weeks here on the show. You know, sales enablement is perhaps the fastest growing area in sales, and it plays an increasingly important role in helping make sales teams ready to sell and also enabling them to become more relevant to their buyers. Now, this is a critical issue for sales professionals. Studies find that more and more C-level execs are reporting that they're not really getting value from the interaction with sales reps. And that's obviously a problem for sellers, as we need to be able to have those high-level conversations in order to win deals. So in our conversation today, Pat shares his perspectives and shares some case studies on the role of sales enablement in helping sellers win more deals. All right, here we go. Pat Lynch, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Andy. Greetings from San Francisco.
Oh, you are in San Francisco today. Great. Yeah.
From Denver, but in San Francisco
today.
San
Francisco, okay. So, standard question I ask all my guests when they come on. The first question is, so in your mind, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales reps today?
I would say that the biggest challenge facing sales reps today is the lack of effective and good coaching they're receiving.
Okay. I would agree in large measure with that. So is that different? I mean, I think back to early in my career, and you can look back early in your career in sales. I have all these memories of lots of good coaching. In fact, mentors I can specifically point to that were largely responsible for helping me develop as the way I developed. I mean, what's changed?
Well, you were very fortunate, Andy, very fortunate. The research, I from several different resources, I think talks around 25 to 36 minutes a week that a sales manager is providing coaching. Not sure what that means, and it doesn't say good coaching to a rep. And I'm always fascinated by that because if you've ever played a sport, a team sport, other than flag football, maybe growing up as a kid or something, let's just take high school, right? It's not like five guys just showed up some Friday night to play another team.
Right.
They were coached and they ran plays. So what I find fascinating is, let's fast forward to real life. Got to make a paycheck, a profession, and it's like people are showing up Friday night and pick up ball, but they're responsible to actually win, hit a number.
Right.
There's almost very, very little coaching going on. So I call it a plague in the sales profession today.
Well, I agree. And so I was at a Topo summit a couple years ago, and there was a panelist who shall remain nameless who said, somewhat disparagingly, we don't do one-on-ones anymore. They're a waste of time.
Okay.
This was a VP from a SaaS company.
Okay.
And I started the same reaction you did. It was just sort of stunned silence. It's like, okay. It's like, and I can understand that if they're one-on-ones, and it sounded like from what he was talking about, he treated his one-on-ones as basically a deal review. And it's gotten so bad in some conversations when I talk to VPs, again, especially from tech companies, but you're seeing in others now too, is to say, well, maybe we need to redefine everything and say, look, we've got managing. Coaching
we'll say, yeah, that's just tactical, right? And then we have mentoring, which is developing the individual. And maybe we need to change our paradigm. So instead we think about coaching and the people not really knowing what it is, we get more specific and say, okay, we got managing. You're organizing, directing activities. You got coaching, which is, hey, we're going to talk about this deal and what you need to do to get it closed. And then we're going to talk about mentoring as let's talk about, hey, what do you think you need to do to get better and how can I help you?
Right. Yeah. The reason I believe strongly that it's a plague that's affecting our profession is because, let's just look at the data and research for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like my wife says, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame.
Right.
And so it helps to bring some objectivity. And so if we just look at, I'm a big believer in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Begin with the end in mind.
Right.
So if you're in sales, your end in mind is to win, to close the deal, right? And then you work backwards. What I'm stunned by, and I'm not being sensational with these adjectives, is if, again, back to CSO Insights you mentioned earlier in the program, I would say one of the most powerful and compelling data points I've ever seen in research, of all the different research, is the fact that if you move, and this according to CSO Insights, move from an ad hoc sales coaching program to a formal sales coaching program, you can get a lift in win rates already in your forecast. I think, around 11 to 13% increase in win rates.
Right.
So I remember asking sales leaders, and I still do today, if you're not focused on some type of formal sales coaching process, knowing that the upside is so huge, what are you doing? And then work backwards.
Yeah.
So,
well, I sort of phrase it the same way. I put out an article in the video a couple of years ago. I was basically saying, if you're not coaching, what the hell are you doing?
Oh, amen, brother.
Right? I mean, you're only going to succeed if the people that work for you succeed. So if that's not your top priority every day,
right?
What is?
Well, yeah, and so let's rewind that a little bit.
Sure.
So I was at a banking conference, and there was one sales program in the banking conference. Okay, and I was one of a handful of non-bankers, and I went to the sales aspect of it, and there was probably about 50 people in attendance, and I was at a table with about 11 people. I heard so much stuff about what coaching wasn't. I finally just, raised my hand. And I said, could you all define what coaching is to me? Now, I'm not making this up.
Sure.
Out of the 11 people, 8 said, coaching is when my rep comes into my office and reports to me what they're doing for the day. And I said, well, that's like Peyton Manning going to the sideline and telling the coach what he's about to do and then coming back in. I'm like, no. Right. But so I think sometimes we have to literally reset, right, and go, do you actually know what coaching is? And by the way, I'm not throwing sales managers or sales leaders under the bus. The reason I believe strongly that it's a plague that affects our profession is because there are very few mentors. How can you do better if you've never seen better? Right. If you've never been coached, if you've never even seen a coach, let alone good coaching, how can we expect realistically that a top performing sales rep who's been promoted into a sales manager could even be successful? I mean, I've got some comment on that. I can reserve till later, but I think we need to agree as a profession that we're being afflicted.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that it's part of this trend we're seeing with a sort of lazy term, I'll say big data and metrics is that somehow we can become sort of metrics jockeys, the term that some people use, not me. But we turn sales managers into people who are just looking at the metrics and not really understanding how to use that data, but then thinking they can use it to, quote unquote, coach people. And unfortunately, it's not working. I mean, this is, to me, one of the plagues we have of in sales is we're generating more data than we know what to do with, and we don't know how to use it. And what we tend to do with the data is we tend to use it as human beings do, not just salespeople, is sort of to confirm what we already believe to be true. and
Right.
rather than questioning any assumptions that we really have. And so that also, I think, is sort of the thing. It's a sort of easy reliance. And you see this sort of times, especially I think in SaaS companies, I hear this all the time is if they're sending out 1,000 emails and hoping to, at the end of the day, to convert, 20 of those into orders, if they have to double sales the next year, the first thing I think about is let's double the number of emails we send, as opposed to saying, well, how do we make each of our contacts more effective and efficient so that we can increase our close rate out of 1,000 as opposed to, slash and burn a bigger number. And this is...
Now notice when you describe that, where is the human person in that? Where's the behavioral aspect, right?
Right.
I mean, there's machine learning. Well, that implies who's learning? The machine, the person? I mean, sometimes we just remember, right? I began with a research company
Sure.
that has an ecosystem, but there's no customer involved. I'm like, okay, something's wrong with that picture. And I think that's actually a little bit scary when we start building ecosystems and they don't have a customer, and this is a sales enablement ecosystem.
Right. Yeah.
So,
let's dive into sales enablement, because this begins to address the issue. And I think there's confusion about what sales enablement means. And I think the picture maybe is more expansive than a lot of people understand. I mean, a lot of times you talk to people, sales enablement is just, hey, let's get the right content at the right time for the sales rep. All right, that's fine. But I tend to look at it more as you do, I think, from a behavioral standpoint, is how do we, in a sales readiness standpoint, is how do we get our people in a position where they can deal effectively with a prospect?
Right. Now, I know the difference between correlation and causation, but
You're one of the few, by the way.
Well, only because I try to memorize the definition, so I don't get confused. But what is interesting, and I'm not going to correlate the data here, but we talked earlier about this slippery slope of overall quota attainment by CSO Insights, one of the most powerfully scary research pieces a sales leader would ever see. And that's going, I think it was 2011 to 2016, overall quota attainment went from 63% down to 51%, right?
And this is based on their survey of 2,500.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the sample size, but yeah, it was a large sample size. But the bottom line is, as you know, you can actually develop a trend, right, over 5-6 year period, and it's going in the wrong direction,
right.
Actually a very scary direction. Isn't it interesting to see that the title of sales enablement within the last 3 years has just skyrocketed? I think the latest stat was, higher than 25%. In the last year, the number of titles was sales enablement on LinkedIn. So maybe what's taking place in the marketplace is management is realizing rut-row. It's going the wrong way. We all know what the definition of insanity is. Hey, let's grab that person who's in sales training or maybe sales ops, stop the bleeding. Right. So I'm not sure, but, and I'm not going to correlate that data, but it's interesting to see, right? So the question is, what's taking place here? Why did the Sales Enablement Society, which just started 2 years ago, go from, of which I'm a founding member out of Denver, why did we go from 0 to 2,500 members as a all volunteer organization in less than 2 years? Something's up.
So I agree. So yeah, interesting to see what the lead time is in terms of starting to see a turnaround. But so tell people, in your mind, what is sales enablement?
Well, it's a lot of things to a lot of people.
Right.
So I don't know if Scott Santucci is the actual author of this quote, but I heard it first at the National Sales Enablement Society meeting in Dallas last year. And he said that a sales enablement has been defined as the person who is the fixer of broken things. So that oftentimes is what's happening. For me, I take a very, very different viewpoint, only in that sales enablement should be focused on helping our salespeople win. Can we just get down to that definition, to that simple definition? because before the title sales enablement, you had sales support.
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been people like myself in the past and others who are doing sales support. And then over time, it started to mature into sales enablement. But there's a lot of things that sales enablement people can do for salespeople, for sales managers, for sales leaders. But at the end of the day, if they're not helping their salespeople win, kind of back to what you said earlier, if they're not helping, the sales manager's not helping to coach their people to win, what are they doing?
Well,
right?
I think that's a question that many managers will sort of come up with, or CEOs listening to this conversation saying, well, okay, if your job is to help sales win, isn't that my VP of sales job?
Well, okay, let me give you an example. So I was involved in working with a Fortune 500 company with their sales architecture, okay? And really smart people, they're doing a fabulous job. What was interesting is HR got involved on a global scale. Now, what was very interesting in that time frame of probably 2-3 months, I was listening for, as the architecture was being built in sales enablement, how are you going to help your salespeople win? It never came up. It never came up. It was about training the salespeople, rarely coaching, but a lot of training and content and sales process. I mean, really important things, very good things. But how come if you're designing this infrastructure, you don't begin with the end in mind?
Right.
I'm just asking the question.
And they said,
exactly.
They said, right. Well, and I think that is one of the dangers, I think, on one hand, with I think we've seen a little bit with sort of the increased specialization within sales. And believe me, I think sales enablement is a very important function, because clearly something's not occurring that should be occurring in terms of helping putting our people in position to win. But yeah, I think people get part of the after effect of or one of the effects of this hyper specialization of roles is that people are just so focused on just what they do, and in a very sort of micro sense, and we don't tie the whole piece together that starts with the customer. And
correct.
And I make the same comment because I've, on this podcast, I've done well over 650 episodes, and I've probably interviewed 150 to 200, SaaS company founders or VPs or something. And, the one question they have struggled to answer is, well, okay, how does they talk about the process, and so it's great, you got your process and you're supporting these tools, but how does this help the customer make a decision to buy from you?
Yeah, that is a great point, right? So again, I'm not being sensational, but it's a little scary when a research firm puts a sales enablement ecosystem together and leaves out the customer, right? So anytime you build the sales process, if you have one, by the way, right? A lot of companies have sales methodologies, but the hard work is building that foundation. If you can begin to build the foundation of sales process, the next step, okay, before the framing of the home goes in, you've got the concrete foundation. Can we please agree that there's a customer out there and that we might want to think about mapping our sales process to their buying process? We just might want to think about that. I've worked with a lot of companies who do in fact have a sales process, and they have these really nice sales stages and sales playbooks. And the scary thing, I probably need to come up with a better word, Andy.
You've only used it about 5 times, but yeah.
Is the fact that there is no customer buying process.
Well, I think that's not one of the challenges, I think, for sales enablement is that, I think the customer buying process for the most part is a fiction, in that the sense that, you look at most products that we're selling these days, especially if we're selling a complex product of any sort, the customer buys this once every 5 years. They don't have a documented process for something they do once every 5 years. And so I think when we talk about just the point you made before is we get so rigid with our processes, our stages, our stage exit criteria, because we're trying to map it to something that occurs once every 5 years. And so I think, to me, one of the things about getting people sales ready is sort of this, not just training, not just situational training. I sort of use three R's, readiness, relevance, and risk. Is we have to be able to teach people how to be adaptable and take risks in order to move deals forward, right? That aren't within the narrow constraints of the process you've laid out. To me, the top performers in life that I've always worked with and I've seen myself, and I've done myself, is I think I have an idea of what I think the buyer's process is, but I know it's not necessarily going to conform to that. So what do I do when reality hits my process? And that's where the rubber meets the road in many cases, is salespeople don't know how to adapt because we're training them that you've got this rigid set of stages and these exit criteria and playbooks. It's like, well, that's great. I love that. But life doesn't conform to that. So what do you do at that point?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little story on that.
Okay.
All right. So once upon a time, I was working for a large company, and the vice president of sales said, we're going to be nimble. And I thought, nope, we're a really big company. We can never be nimble. I think I was the only person hired from outside the company out of the 130 division managers. And so I said, we'll never be nimble. Well, I think his face started to get kind of red.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, the next thing out of my mouth better be good because it'll save my job, I hope. And so I asked everybody, I said, has anybody been on an aircraft carrier? And fortunately, nobody had been on an aircraft carrier. And I said, okay, will an aircraft carrier ever be nimble? Well, no. Okay, we're never going to be nimble. However, what's on an aircraft carrier that's nimble? An F-18 fighter. I said, our job at this very big company is to go find those F-18s, of which I did. I found the whole master black belt division within this company, and we are catapulted off the deck. Today, companies say they want to be nimble. The radical change that's happening, Andy, is companies. These large companies with technology can actually start to be that F-18. And that is something dramatic. Now, I've only seen that from leaders who have a real vision and they're not afraid of taking risk, but they also have an experience of using technology and a platform like a sales readiness platform. Maybe that's our carrier deck, right? At MindTickle, we catapult off, our clients. But we allow them to be nimble. I've called myself Gumby for many years in sales. Gumby bends, but Gumby doesn't break.
Right.
And so go back to the definition of sales enablement, the fixer of broken things. Well, if you're Gumby, if you're nimble as a sales enablement practitioner, chances are you're going to be very successful.
I think it's probably a key requirement for anybody that's in that job is that you have to be flexible because, as I mentioned before, it's just one of the things I always find so curious is, and maybe it's just a sign of when I developed my own sales career, we didn't have these technologies, but if I spent 15 years selling complex multi-million-dollar communication systems for startups to the major corporations of the world, and so we had no track record, no branding, no technology. I'd fly to Europe to cold call. I mean, it's that type of thing.
Did you? Oh my gosh!
But
in first class too.
No. Believe me. I wish. Not in the early days of those companies. But you had real world to deal with, right? As you just had to do what needed to be done. And I'm concerned. You talk things that are scary. What I see as scary is that, again, we seem to be. It's sort of interesting, especially since a lot of the leading edge stuff emanates out of our tech segments in terms of sales, use of technology, and it's now starting to proliferate outside of that. But I find it really sort of interesting that in industries that are companies are devoted to disrupting the markets they're going into are adopting increasingly rigid sales processes. And we're not preparing people to be adaptable and to take the risks they need to take in the moment in order to move deals forward. And I think that's part of what accounts for what I consider a really abysmally low close rate, like in the SaaS business in general. 20% close rate, and they pat themselves on the back. And I'm thinking back when I was selling 20%, I was out of work.
Correct.
So they make it up by numbers, though. This is where we get to the volume and the quantity versus quality dilemma, because some companies, if they're especially sort of the lucky ones that have really identified the product market fit and they're riding the wave, that number quantity business works for a while. All right, covers a lot of sins. Eventually you pay the piper.
Right. So you can carpet bomb people with email, or you could be strategic. You could have a drip campaign that actually is dripping value. I mean, real value.
Right.
Why don't more companies do that? It takes time. And especially if you're a SaaS company, the clock is always ticking, tick tock. But again, I believe my responsibility is to oftentimes help not only here at MindTickle, but in the marketplace. Let's just pause between the stimulus and the response. Let's just pause for a moment. And so the reason I say let's pause, I'm speaking out of the eye, is because the very first class I ever took, training course in sales, I'll never forget it. The instructor said, I want to give you an equation. I'm thinking, okay, this is sales. I'm not real good at math. He said, no. He goes, you'll use this. Trust plus empathy equals relationship. I can tell you that when I learned that 24 years ago, I've used that equation more in the last 2 years than in the 22 years before that. Question is why? Because as we move rapidly using technology, the human starts to get left behind little by little by little, to the point where we're not even putting customers in a sales enablement ecosystem. Or we're mapping a sales process, and we spent a lot of money on this, and we've got some great playbooks, but we have no idea how our customer buys. Clearly, maybe we need to pause between all this stimulus, right, and our rapid response. So if I can help just bring a little bit of sanity and also a genuine voice of the customer, as in we have a customer or we have a prospect, let's not forget them, right? In all the rah-rah, then maybe we can be more successful. There's a Mike Easterday, he's the CEO of Integrity Solutions. When I first met him, he said, well, Pat, sales is a noble profession. I'd never heard that before. I've never heard that since. And I loved that statement by Mike. And I'm like, you know what? Sales not can be a noble profession. Sales is a noble profession. And so again, begin with the end in mind. If you can start with sales is a noble profession, then look back and go, is everything we're doing, are we making it a truly noble profession?
Well, and I think that the key to making it a noble profession is the customer experience during their buying process. And yeah, we certainly, consumer products, a lot of emphasis talked about, customer experience in the buying process, through the online purchase. Not nearly enough in B2B sales do we talk about the customer experience throughout the buying process. Yeah, we'll talk about it in customer success and so on. But this is, to my mind and my experience, and this is, I don't think is an outlandish thing to say, is people don't give enough credence to the percentage of the customer decision that's based on their experience going through the buying process with you.
Right. So let's take a look at that and ask ourselves, why is that happening? Right? Who's kind of at fault there? All right. So I'll take some of the blame. Okay. In that, for example, how are we training? It's kind of like, what are we teaching our kids in school, right? Mm-hmm. But not how we're training for a moment, but what are we teaching our sellers? How are we teaching them? But what are we teaching them?
Right.
Okay. So I'll give you a concrete example. I've worked with some just fantastic companies, large companies, smaller companies, but Xerox, I went to Xerox University in Leesburg. For 2.5 months, you go through incredible training. FedEx, incredibly well-run company. In each of these companies, they had what's known as learning management systems. Okay, they were telling me how they wanted me to be taught, and this was the methodology. Okay, I buy that. I'm on your field, right? You're the coach. I'm the player. You own this field. This is how you run the play. What was really interesting about that is that I learned, but I quickly forgot a lot of that information. And I would have to go back to the LMS to remember something, or how to do something. That's not helping me sell. That's not helping my team sell. And so let's go back to that team sport, right? When you're actually playing the sport, do you just like stop in midfield and go, oh, I got to go to the LMS. oh, I got it. Okay. Freeze time. Okay, everybody, let's proceed with the play.
What am I supposed to be doing? Right.
Exactly. But that's what we're asking our sellers to do day in and day out with, and no offense to an LMS. Okay. I call them, if you're looking at an LMS for salespeople, I call that a legacy management system.
Right.
Okay. It's not helped me make one dime. And I don't know that it's helping sellers who are on the field playing the game right now. I don't know that it's helping them make any money. So the radical, I know paradigm shift is a bit overused, but the radical change because of technology, okay, is a platform in which the seller can learn as they're selling. That is a dramatic shift. That's why one of the reasons why I joined MindTickle is because literally we're part of the cure. Right. I vetted, like many SaaS companies. I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't. And if I really do believe, which I do, that there's one plague in the sales profession of the lack of effective sales coaching, why would I want to spend any of my professional career being part of that ailment? Yeah. Absolutely not. And so that's why I'm where I am today, is we are part of the cure. And then I really want to make sure that the profession of sales enablement, and now we're starting to really be pulled into learning management and more I'm listening and learning from chief learning officers. Why? Because there's a lot of pain out there and people need a cure. They really genuinely need a solution. Technology can absolutely help them, but not the noise of, I think Nancy Narden has close to 450 sales tools. I mean,
well, there are a couple thousand, I think, all told now.
Well, yeah, maybe. Okay, thank you for correcting me. But I don't think that's helping our sales profession. No. And I'm not saying that just because it's my opinion. I'm literally saying that because many of my peers in sales enablement, when I was at CSO Insights and since I've been at MindTickle, have come to me saying, Pat, I know technology is passing me by. Which sales tools should I get? Right? So look, I know we're talking about SaaS and we're in high tech, but also there's a lot of industries out there that are not as mature. And I'll give you an example. I made a posting on LinkedIn. I was talking to a sales enablement professional outside high tech, and I said, "Tell me about your sales stack." And he said, "What's a sales stack?" And I thought, okay, good point. Bad on me. So I think sometimes we always need to be understanding first, right? Rather than, hey, I want you to see it my way. And even though I'm with a fantastic SaaS company, I'm in the Sales Enablement Society, there's a lot of high tech, that doesn't mean that translates to other verticals.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think one of the new perspectives, at least from my perspective, not being too redundant, is that the sales profession needs to adopt I love this idea of sales readiness. I think that this puts a stake in the ground for starting to measure proficiency in a way that's really important, right? And rather than just sort of, hey, bring everybody in for a day and we're going to, bring in Andy Paul, he's going to talk to him, and then, I disappear, and as you said, 3 days later, everybody's forgotten that, is that you have a sort of ongoing way to measure people's readiness to sell to the customers that you're serving, and we'll sort of call that proficiency. But I think the other thing you brought up earlier, which is to me is extremely important, that not enough attention is given to, is this concept I call relevance. I think that if salespeople thought about, am I relevant to my buyers, that it puts a whole different spin on it for them to say, okay, we've got all this technological change we referenced before, AI, machine learning, that's changing the equation on both selling and buying side. Is how do I maintain my relevance to the customer? And I think that really, to me, it becomes the distinguishing characteristic between those who get the business and those who don't, is you're demonstrating your relevance. And, that obviously has lots of components to it, business acumen, experience, proficiency in certain ways, relationship building, being a human, as you prefaced our conversation with, to start with, how valuable that is. I think it's becoming more valuable. I think that's just something we need to spend more time focusing on, and it's hard to measure. I've been thinking about how we actually measure relevance, but part of it is a mindset too, is saying, look, I'm going to put some of the onus on you as an individual, as a salesperson. We can do so much for you, and we need to do more, obviously, but also there's a part that only the individual will be able to come up with too, that says, what are my customers really looking for from me?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you, Andy, okay, on the relevance part, but let's go back for a moment on what about a sales manager or sales leader saying, you need to be relevant, and I'm going to help you be more relevant, right?
That'd be fantastic.
Well, it would be, but the question is, why is not that happening? Don't know the answer. So I think we need to put the onus on the salesperson. Absolutely. It's a noble profession. They've chosen that profession, but let's not leave out the sales manager or sales leader. So,
I think, and I'll give an answer to that before we go, because we have to wrap up in a second. But I'll give you a few words. I mean, Xerox, IBM. I started at Burroughs. These were companies that trained. We had an ecosystem of companies, especially in the leading edge tech companies, leading edge at the time. That, as you said, you spent 2.5 months at in Leesburg. We had Xerox University. I spent 10 or 12 weeks, my first year and a half with Burroughs and training. I mean, think about that. What tech company do we know that within the first year and a half, people are spending 10 to 12 weeks off-site learning their job and their profession? And it wasn't perfect training by any stretch of imagination, but it was this basis. And what we don't have now, and I think this is what is one of the complicating issues, is we have to learn how to compensate for the lack of this these days. Because even our big tech companies, at least to my knowledge, aren't requiring people to spend that much time learning their jobs.
Right. So back to sales readiness for a moment, right? I'm glad you brought up the salesperson needs to be relevant. If you're not relevant, are you sales ready? So just a quick story on that. So I was calling on a hospital, a very large hospital, and this is the time when pharma reps could just come and go in a hospital. So we closed this hospital and then a healthcare system, and the economic buyer went to a regional sales conference, and he was the keynote. So I had him in the car. So I asked him one question. I said, why did you take my call? Why did you do business with me, with us? And he said, you know what? He goes, I've been thinking about that. Like, how did you get through? Because he told me that, I'm not kidding, he got 70 reps a day calling on him.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Exhausting, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, but when you called, which wasn't a lot, you gave me something of value. That's what I remember. And I've never forgot that. And so going back to your point, Andy, on relevance, I think, the goal of a sales readiness platform should make that salesperson, through ongoing learning, whether that be starting an onboarding. And by the way, don't leave them after you've onboarded them, right? Don't desert them. You got them. Whether that be through gamification, micro learning, other types of training, analytics, all of that, right? Help them really create and internalize that value, that relevancy,
right?
So that ongoing training constantly reinforces the value and the relevancy that you can bring to a customer or prospect. I don't care what you're selling, you're probably going to be very good at it and very successful.
Excellent. All right, Pat, we're going to have you back pretty soon because we just didn't even touch what I had prepared to talk about today. But it was a great conversation. It was a great conversation, though, and a lot of value for people.
I hope it was beneficial for others. I know you and I had a good time.
No, I'm sure it absolutely is, and that's why we just need to have you back on and continue it. So, so just tell people a little bit quickly about MindTickle before we go, and I know we're going to do another session later on about MindTickle too. So, tell us a little bit about MindTickle.
So I would just say, which many people don't know, MindTickle was formed by 4 engineers from India who had never sold a thing in their life. I'm like, okay, tell me more. And they saw a problem in sales and they said, let's go solve that. So I love the fact that MindTickle, and not many people know this, is actually an engineering company. We have many engineers at MindTickle, and we have our culture is actually based on there's a problem, let's go solve it.
Mm-hmm.
I right out of college, I worked in aerospace engineering. I love working with engineers because of that mentality. So everything we do at MindTickle with our platform, it's not a tool. You can probably take 5 tools, and that's our platform out of the box from a sales readiness standpoint, whether that be onboarding, training, gamification, micro-learning for SKOs, all bundled with analytics. It's bringing that objectivity I talked about earlier, because when you're in the frame, you can't see the picture, right? So MindTickle really does bring a lot of objectivity for sales managers to actually begin the process of coaching with objective data, et cetera. At MindTickle, that culture, that mindset of there's a problem, we need to solve for it, doesn't just apply to prospects. Oh my gosh, once you're a customer at MindTickle, it's constantly ongoing. So the fun part for me is I'm learning from our product team all the time about what we're doing. And I go, well, who asked you to do that? and the director of our product engineering, he just looked at me like, well, no one, we just heard that's a problem. We're going to go fix that. What a great mentality. What a great attitude to be a part of.
Right.
So that's a little bit about MindTickle.
All right. Well, you guys can check it out at mindtickle.com. And I said we're going to have another conversation coming up. We'll talk more about that. But Pat, it was a pleasure. And I said we'll have to have you back on the show soon.
Thanks, Andy. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Pat. Again, that was Pat Lynch, VP of Sales Enablement Excellence and Innovation at MindTickle. As mentioned before, Pat will be back on Accelerate in the next few weeks to talk more about sales readiness and sales enablement. Up next, it's time for another back and forth with my fantastic co-host, Bridget Gleason. I'm still getting acclimated to the idea that I'm talking with her on Wednesday instead of Fridays, because we did that Friday gig over 330 times. 130 times over the course of 2.5 years. So today, Bridget and I are going to tackle the topic of how sales leaders should work with and coach their sales reps to help them move out of their comfort zones. For sales reps to take their careers to the next level, whether that's working bigger deals or working with bigger customers or positioning themselves for promotion, it requires they take risks and proactively evolve how they sell. Now, this can be a difficult step for many to take and often requires coaching and support from a manager to make it happen. So what can you be doing as a sales leader to help your sellers move out of their comfort zones? Well, let's jump into it with Bridget. Bridget, how are you doing?
Andy. I'm doing super. Wonderful.
Oh, excellent.
What about you? Where are you?
I am in New York as I record this, on the
nice
eastern edges of the Zero Time Selling and Accelerate empire. And just
like you, enjoying the last blast of winter here. It's recording this in early April. We had snow already in April. It's like, geez Louise.
That we did.
Goodness gracious.
Crazy, huh?
Yeah, it melted almost instantly, though, so that was fine. But nonetheless, it served to get the weather forecasters all bent out of shape. They had another storm to name, because heaven forbid we get a weather system they don't name these days.
I know. What is that about?
I don't know.
What is that about?
Try not to hurt their feelings, I guess. I don't know. Storm's going to be sensitive.
I must be.
So, I saw a great sales-related cartoon in the New Yorker. Actually, it was New Yorker online, but
Yeah.
and it was two guys talking, and one guy turns to the other, and the caption is, "That reminds me of the thing I was going to say next, regardless." I thought, perfect sales cartoon. That reminds me of the thing I was going to say next, regardless. Yes, our overscripted sales reps.
I love that.
I don't care what you tell me. This is what I'm going to say to you back. So
Exactly. Yeah, this is the answer.
this is the answer, right? So actually, it sort of ties into the topic we're going to talk about today, which was comfort zones, right? Part of the reason people do those things is they're trying to stay in their comfort zones. You know, don't ask me something I don't know anything about or not prepared to talk about. And I thought, and there's been a lot written about it. And I had a great talk with a guest recently on the show, a professor from Brandeis, I believe, Andy Molinsky. We talked about his new book on how to break out of your comfort zones, how to break your comfort addictions. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a really interesting topic, because we always start talking about from the individual perspective. I just wondered, sort of perspective of sales managers, is how do you help people break out of these comfort zones, right? When they get into this zone, they're just doing the things they feel comfortable with. They're not pushing themselves. They're not really doing what they need to do to get out there and either make calls or have the type of hard discussions with prospects and customers to move deals forward.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about, all right, with my own team, what are the comfort zones? I guess it's easier for me to think about what are some common sort of traps, or like, where do they get stuck? Where are common places that sales reps get stuck that we want them to get out of that particular comfort zone?
Or where do they hide?
Or where do they hide? Yeah, yeah. Maybe they're not. Yeah, they're hiding in a certain place. That's a great way to think about it. Also,
yeah, you have these activity reports, and even in there, you can see where the reps are not, just not putting themselves out there the way they need to. And I remember working with one rep years and years ago that, it was like the activity report was almost perfect, but there was just that one thing. It's like, are you really making the calls or not? And you really push came to shove, really wasn't making the calls. I mean, he made a certain type of calls, but he wouldn't make the ones like the existing customers, and maybe the prospects he had met, but the things that were just completely cold. It was just the hardest time getting him to take that step forward.
Yeah, and I think that's with a lot of reps. I think that's with a lot of reps that they have that's a great example of where they get stuck or hide, as you put it.
Yeah, and they can say, "Oh, I talked to these existing customers. Maybe I got an upgrade or upsell from this order and from this customer, excuse me, and I'm dealing with these prospects, and it looks busy." I think this is one of the real challenges for sales managers, is to sort of distinguish between what looks sort of busy versus that really is real productive activity. And when you sort of have that, that's why I think people are sort of stuck in their comfort zones.
And so then I guess back to your question, how do you help people get out of it?
Well,
I'm interviewing you today, in case you hadn't noticed. I didn't intend it, but it just is.
But here we are. It just jumped out. Just jumped out.
Yes, I can't help it. I'm bossy by nature.
I think that's the subtitle of your book, isn't it?
I'm bossy by nature.
Yeah.
That would be no surprise. There'd be no surprises. Anybody who knew me would be like, yeah, we already knew that. I don't need to read the book.
Well, for me, to answer your question, Miss Bossy Pants, is that
what managers have to do is when you've identified these areas that their comfort zones are in, and you're trying to get them to move out, is too often what a manager will do is say, all right, I'm gonna lay out, what needs to happen here. And it's too big, right? So if you're trying to get people to step outside their comfort zone, they got to start with small steps, not big steps. And so you want to give people small successes that they can build on that, start luring them further and further. The feeling of success starts luring them further and further out of their comfort zone. And so it's not say, oh, tell somebody to go make 50 calls. It's like, hey, and then get back to you and we'll see how you did. It's like, well, okay, tomorrow let's pick 2 accounts on this list that you're going to call. Here's what, how we're going to position the call. This is what you're going to say. And then let's come back and we're either going to record the call and listen to it, or you come back and report on it. And go small steps. And that's how people acclimate themselves to getting outside their comfort zone, as they can see bit by bit, well, this isn't so horrible.
Yeah, I like that. I think if it's too big, there's just too much fear or resistance, or there's too much resistance, and maybe we don't even necessarily understand why, but there's going to be a lot of resistance. And so I like the idea of a small step that just gets repeated over and over and over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep repeating it till that becomes a new habit, till that becomes a new normal. Well, that becomes something that is familiar and you feel comfortable with. And then I think, then you can go. And I think that's, for me, also a very natural way to move out of a comfort zone or a place where I'm stuck, is pick one thing that I'm going to practice and just have my focus on that one thing that I'm going to get over. Once I get over that, then I'm going to go to the next.
Right. And I think that as a manager, what your job is when you've assigned these small steps, these tiny things somebody's going to do, you have to praise them lavishly when they get them done. And you think, oh, hey, we're all adults. We don't need to praise them, like kids for doing some little thing. It's like, no, that's exactly what you're doing, because this is a hard task somebody is doing. And you need to give them rewards for it. Similarly, if you're pushing yourself, you need to build in a series of rewards for doing what you're doing.
What do you do that for yourself now, Andy, where you build rewards in for if you've got something hard to do? Do you say, okay, when I finish doing this, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go eat a pint of chocolate chip ice cream? Or
well, I'm not doing that anymore. My wife and I have embarked on the Whole30 eating plan. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
What is it? Just quickly, I know this is not
it's sort of like the paleo. It's no additives, no sugar, no grains, no legumes, no good stuff, no dairy.
What do you eat?
What do I eat? Vegetables.
I don't hear. Okay, vegetables. Good.
Meat and vegetables and salad. Meat, vegetables, and salad ad nauseum. But it's supposed to be some of these things, sort of like a reset, if you will, for your body, because you get out all the additives and the sugar, and I don't know, we'll see. I think my wife's a bigger believer than I am, but I'm on the program though.
Okay.
No alcohol either.
Okay, good.
Yeah, good.
Easy for me to say.
Yeah, I was going to say on a Friday night.
Okay,
but anyway, what was your question?
So just
yes, I do reward myself. Yeah, could be going for a run, could be hopping on the bike, going for a short bike ride. In some cases, if it's just a matter of 5 minutes, because I like to work, and so those 25-minute sprints and then take 5 minutes off.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Go walk around the apartment for 5 minutes, or do a set of ab work or something. I hope that doesn't sound too compulsive, but
it does. But
Continue. So yeah, just little things, or give myself 5 minutes to go look at Twitter.
Yeah, so this is also what I encourage reps, managers to do when they're trying to incorporate a new behavior to get out of a comfort zone, is to make sure just build in a reward for yourself after you do it. If I remember, Andy, when I was starting a company and I would cold call every day. Every morning I'd cold call, and I hated it. But I knew I needed to do it, and I did it. But I would always plan. I would do it the first thing, and I would always plan something at the end of it. And it was often different every day, that I would say, okay, once I finish this, then I'm going to, like you said, go for a run, or I'm going to take 20 minutes, I'm going to read for 20 minutes, or like I would just have something that would just be the end point, as well as just a little psychological reminder. I do the hard things, and I do things I don't always like to do, and I give myself a pat on the back, or just good, glad you did it. Now let's keep going. So I think that's important to include in there when you're encouraging people to learn to do something new.
Yeah. So again, if you're a manager working with somebody you have that, again, seems a little stuck, as you talked about, a little too comfortable, maybe hiding from something, give them something small to break out of it that you can repeat, praise them, help them master that, and then they can take the next step to feel more comfortable, maybe taking it on their own, doing it personally, as you talked about, is reward yourself. And I love this idea of these Pomodoro timers, the little app you can have on either your phone or your system that just counts down to 25 minutes and then says take 5, and you take 5 and come back and it starts over again. And it's a great way to sort of work in really concentrated bursts. And if you have that reward at the end, then say, okay, in this 25-minute space, I'm going to make 5 calls.
It's great.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that was sort of interesting, a boss did to me at one point, excuse me, when I was stuck, I guess, is he gave me the name of somebody. And it was like a CEO of a company that was in our territory. And he said, hey, could you call this person? I'm a little busy. Could you call this person for me? They had reached out to me and they're expecting my call. And I thought, okay, well, I can do that. That's easy. The stage is set and so on. They weren't. But, it's funny that the CEO got hold. He went along with it. I sort of said, John said I should call you. He should be expecting my call. And not at all. But I was really calm going into it. I was successful and really broke that ice at that particular situation for me. So even a little deception works from time to time.
Are you recommending that?
Well, I think it can be used. Yeah, I think managers indulge in that all the time, don't you? I mean, not from a
fraud. You mean?
Not fraud, no. But things like I just sort of said is they sort of set people up for challenges that maybe hadn't been clearly explained.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I probably do that, and I'm not as aware. I'm not as aware of it. I typically don't like it. I don't think it sets the right tone. I get why people use it, but I think for me, I don't know. I can't think of a time that I intentionally did it. Maybe with my children, but on the sales floor, I don't know that I've intentionally done. It's interesting though.
Yeah.
Out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, I remember my first job out of school, being sent on to call on prospects all the time there was always some ulterior motive behind it. One time being sent to a customer, the managers knew that the customer was not happy. I had no idea. And of course I came back with an order, which was great. They weren't expecting that.
That's always good.
They weren't expecting that part. So I disarmed the customer by being a new fresh face. So, yeah. All right. So comfort zones, everybody has them. We all have them. You're going to break out of them. Start small, like everything, a new challenge. Break it down into small pieces. As Bridget said, repeat. Master it, then take that next step.
Simple. Sounds so simple.
It does sound so simple.
Doesn't it sound so simple?
It does. All right. Well, Bridget.
Andy.
As always.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Time.
We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Have a great week.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank my guest, Pat Lynch, and my partner in crime, Bridget Gleason. Join me again next week as I welcome Doug Sandler to Accelerate, actually coming back for a second time. Doug is an author, speaker, podcaster, author of the interesting book titled Nice Guys Finish First, and host of the Nice Guys on Business podcast. And of course, as always, I'll be joined by Bridget for our weekly conversation, so be sure to join me then. Thanks again to our sponsor, Discover.org, for their ongoing support of Accelerate. And thank you again for joining me. Until next week, good selling, everyone.